Arizona Congressman Eli Crane. Congressman Crane, former National Security Advisor John Bolton was just indicted for improperly handling classified information. Each count could carry a 10-year prison sentence. What's your reaction?
Hey, Matt, thanks for having me on. My reaction is going back in the time machine and watching John Bolton talk about how President Trump didn't care about the classification system or the sensitivity of the information, or even the sensitivity of how that information was being collected, and he was going on multiple outlets talking about that. And so, you got kind of the hypocrite aspect of it on one side. But the other thing that bothers me about it is the two-tiered justice system. As a young enlisted Navy guy for many years, myself and other sailors and Marines and soldiers, we would watch how if we did something, we would get completely mishandling classified information. We would get hammered, by our justice system, where a guy like, Hillary Clinton at the time, was totally mishandling classified information and got off scot-free. And so this is one thing that I think is good to see, and that, at least under this administration, there's no more two-tiered justice system. It doesn't matter if you're John Bolton or, petty officer, second class Bill Smith in the Navy. There's one standard of justice, and, it doesn't matter what your rank is or whether you're elected official or appointed official.
So I do want to get to this shutdown we're currently in. What's your message to the country about how it's going to affect them?
Well, here's the deal, Matt. Obviously, Democrats, even some in my own state, we've got our, Senator Kelly, and others trying to convince the American people that this is the Republicans' fault. And as you well know, Matt, we voted on a continuing resolution that would go to, the end of November. So we already funded to, keep the government open. And what I've got to say is when CNN and Jake Tapper are basically calling you out and telling Democrats, no, this is on you. If we're going to be consistent with how we've covered shutdowns, you guys are the ones that are continually voting against it. That's number one. I think that's so important here. We understand and we know who's to blame for this shutdown. But I do want to give a shout out to the Trump administration, even though the Democrats have shut the government down on a clean CR, which most of them have voted for, 10 or 20 times. He's done everything in his power to shift pots of money around to make sure that our bases are covered, with our most vulnerable government employees like our military. And so I want to give him a shout out for that. Who knows how long this is going to go on, Matt, but I do hope that Republican leadership continues to hold a hard line, because if we cave on this, Matt, it's going to be a very difficult 3 years going forward. Every time we try and fund the government, the Democrats will come in and say, we want X, Y, and Z, and if you don't give it to us, we're going to shut down the government. So it's very important, especially this early in the game, that we hold the line, put political pressure on them, and remind the American people whose fault this is.
I do want to get to the impact on our troops. I know that's something you care deeply about, but we did have Congressman Eric Burlison on the program recently, and he said that he didn't agree with Speaker Johnson's strategy of keeping Republicans out of Washington, that he thought coming back to Washington in the House, using the House floor to apply that pressure in the form of voting for bills to fund the things we do care about, like our troops and our vets and ICE and CBP. Do you think it's a mistake that the House of Representatives is not convened currently?
Well, I will say this. I will say it gives us a lot of time to work in our districts. Quite frankly, I've got some pretty massive flooding that just took place in my district in Miami and Globe. And so I've been spending a lot of time up there. And, I do think it, puts some pressure on the Democrats, that we're not in Washington. I can understand what my colleague Eric Burlison is saying. I know there's a bunch of people giving, the speaker advice. At the end of the day, I don't know, what he's going to go with, but from the last I heard from him, as a matter of fact, just this morning, I think he's committed to holding the line and keeping us out of D.C. Because as you know, Matt, during government shutdowns, we're not allowed to have our committee hearings, votes. There's a lot of things that are shut down, during the government shutdown. And so there's not a ton for us to do in Washington if the government's actually shut down.